the Raheem Sterling story certainly catches the eye, and there's an investigation ongoing. Had you seen the clip? Have you seen the clip of the man shouting? Yeah. I must confess, so I first saw this with Rio Ferdinand, who tweeted about it, and last night the video had 1 million views. Yeah. And he said, this is, racism, it has to be stamped out. What are we going to do about this? And it's we're all amateur lip readers, I suppose, and I guess because it's planted in my head, looked out for the racist slur and had seen a different one.
Really?
Yes. I had been able, after 20 views, to see effing.
I looked at it and couldn't quite be sure what I was seeing. And I think it's really interesting, like on some of those newspapers, the fans in question, their pictures are pixelated, and in the Sunday Times they're not pixelated, which is very interesting. I just think there's a whole interesting legal thing going on here. The one that caught my eye was last week, because there was a banana skin thrown at Aubameyang last week in a match, and actually that didn't, I think, get half as much coverage as this one does, which to me shows the power of video now in terms of media. If it's caught on video now and it gets out last night, and Ian Wright tweeted it, and it started doing the rounds very quickly.
Yeah, it becomes big very quickly. I mean, it remains to be seen exactly what he said. I mean, I was just struck today when I had thought that it was a completely different slur being talked about, and then I read today, actually everybody else has seen something else. Yeah, there is the danger with lip reading. I suspect if the person in question has not said something racist, then he will have a real case and will go to work on Monday morning and have... it's going to be a tricky situation for him. That said, one, if he did say something, it's obviously very serious and has to be investigated. And two, it's not like he was wishing Raheem Sterling well either. It wasn't an edifying moment either way.
He wasn't either. He's not a kind of archetypal skinhead from the 1970s fuming with incoherent hate because he's basically looks like a terribly violent person. He looks like a middle manager, a kind of a quantity survey. All the sort of parties in this sort of incident just look like characters from The Office. Yeah. That's a kind of a weird aspect of it, because we have a very cliched idea in our heads of who's racist or who's liable to come out with such statements. And Sterling's statement about the press.
Can I read that out, because people may not have seen it? So
I think that's really interesting as well.
Yeah, it really is, and it ties in with the paper review. So Raheem Sterling has taken to Instagram, and he says, "Good morning. I just want to say I'm not normally the person to talk a lot, but when I think I need my point to be heard, I will speak up. Regarding what was said at the Chelsea game, as you can see by my reaction," and you've seen here a picture where he's half smiling or looking away in befuddlement, "I just had to laugh because I don't expect no better. For example, you have two young players starting out in their careers, both play for the same team. Both have done the right thing, which is to buy a new house for their mothers, who have put in a lot of time and love into helping them get where they are. But look how the newspapers get their message across for the young black player and then for the young white player. I think that this is unacceptable. Both innocent, have not done a thing wrong, and just by the way it has been worded, the young black kid is looked at in a bad light, which helps fuel racism and aggressive behaviour. So for all the newspapers that don't understand why people are racist in this day and age, all I have to say is have a second thought about fair publicity and give all players an equal chance." So the story he's talking about, Phil Foden, the Manchester City wonder kid, bought a house for his parents and was talked about setting up their future. Whereas the headline for another Manchester City player who happened to be black is "Young Manchester City footballer 20 who's on 25 grand a week splashes out on mansion on market for 2.25 million despite never having started a Premier League game." And when they're side by side, it would be very fair to say that Raheem Sterling has raised a very fair point.
Yeah, and it's not just about football, this. I mean, this isn't happening in a vacuum. In England in general, like Brexit is a synonym for me. It's just racism. The reason that Brexit is unworkable was that it was never a plan. It's a kind of a fever, and the fever and what's driving that fever is essentially racism at a very kind of multi-layered level. It's just we don't really want foreigners having much to do with our world, and that's why it's people say, "Oh, how are we going to implement this thing?" You can't implement hate. Do you know what I mean? It isn't a sort of a political strategy, you know? And that's why it's utterly unworkable. People think, oh, no, this problem with Northern Ireland. The only thing with Northern Ireland is it was the first example of it encountering reality. And reality doesn't fit with this stuff. Do you know what I mean? This is, when you see Raheem there being abused by these guys, you know, it's madness. There's nothing real about that. It's crazy. It's just ridiculous, right? That's why he's laughing. You know, of course it's absurd. Yet that has become the normal discourse of England at this time of Brexit. So they're not just like dissing Raheem Sterling when they're doing this. It's a whole culture has been diseased by this thing, with the connivance and with the approval of the highest ranking politicians of the land. This is why England is now in this appalling state.
And I presume you agree that the media has played a real part in that? Hugely,
of course it has. It's been disgraced itself daily, not just in the propagandist sense, the openly propagandist newspapers which are owned by, you know, billionaires who are always up to no good. You can see it in the BBC has disgraced itself again and again. I'm watching Newsnight on several occasions, and they're talking to some twat like Ian Duncan Smith, you know, and he's clearly, they get to the point where his argument has totally fallen to the ground. And instead of saying, Ian Duncan Smith, anyone with any sense could have said that everything that you have proposed about Brexit is nonsense. And here you are now. And instead of that, they ask him something like, what does this mean for Theresa May? You see them constantly avoiding it, constantly avoiding the reality and the hard question, because in a way, the people who you know, the official media is afraid of confronting the bought and paid for media. So you've got this malaise.
Why do you think that would be the case? Why would they be afraid of confronting?
They're constantly, there's this knee-jerk thing that they're constantly afraid of going against the people, going against the will of the people. We don't want to be seen as trendy Londoners, you know, who know better than the people of England. Elites. We don't want to be seen as elites, right? Whereas, like, the people driving Brexit are almost all public school boys or extremely rich people. There is this sense that people who have read books are the elite, and the BBC is full of those people. So a lot of people in the BBC are Remainers, I'm sure. I would say about 90% of them, but officially the way they put out their political programmes, they maintain this kind of stuff. So they're assisting it as well. And, you know, of course this kind of thing is going to happen with Raheem Sterling, but it's important, and it's really good that he's put it in that context of newspapers. But I think it's for us as well to see it in an even broader context.
Yeah, no, fair point. Just on the newspaper front, if you were unaware of this thing going on, and it's been talked about more increasingly in the last 6 months with regard to Sterling, there's an Adam Keyworth on Twitter, @AdamKeyworth, who has compiled a chronicle of various headlines relating to Raheem Sterling over the last number of years. I've counted over 30 of them here. He's just done a thread of story after story. And I mean, some of them are quite something. From trouble youth to 100k a week, the life of footy idiot Raheem Sterling in The Sun. I'm not sure why he's a footy idiot, but there you go. Don't be so greedy. This was when he wanted an improved offer and Brendan Rodgers was warning him that he mightn't get it. Now, I don't think don't be so greedy was necessarily Rodgers' phrase. The one where, this is Adam Keyworth, the one where Raheem was obscene, having bought his mum a nice sink out of his own money. England failure steps off plane and insults fans by showing off blinging house. I mean, it's all there. It's all dog whistling.
And you know, Joe, sometimes I think
obscene Raheem is the headline, but don't worry. And they have a pound sign. Sterling is on the up.
I think probably
it's really terrible.
Not in a racist sense at all, but I think I'm probably guilty of this sometimes when I see. I remember being on Twitter making a joke about, you know, there was a story about Fellaini having his own, you know, barber shop in his house. He was selling his house, and I'm going, you know, what's the story here? These guys have more money than sense. So I think that sometimes I fall into that trap as well.
Yeah.
Not on race, but on these guys live such a privileged life. But the one thing I think is interesting about it, and I think it's on that montage as well that you're looking at, is an awful lot of it is done in the news sections of tabloids especially, not in the sports sections, but that's leading, and that's the front page of a lot of these.
Correct,
and I remember being in here at one time with you. I remember we actually were reading a really good feature on Sterling and saying he actually comes across as a really sound guy, and that's not the image that you see of him, but it is very much the news pages, the news-led, agenda and these things.
Because I would say, in fairness to those stories, like the Fellaini has a barber in his house.
I just laughed out loud because I just thought it was so funny.
I think they're okay, and we're all curious about what they spend their money on, because it's just such a detached world from day-to-day living. However, it's almost the volume of Sterling stories.
Yes, and as he's shown with that two boys from Man City. It's written differently if it's a white boy. That's interesting that's his perception, and that he's showing that, because there's serious questions to be asked.
It seems
editorially
he can do no right, because in the Mail they have Manchester City star Raheem Sterling earns £200,000 a week, but takes £80 EasyJet flight back from holiday. Both cheap and lavish.
He's got it everywhere. He gets it in the neck everywhere.
He's called Love Rat in various places. Raheem Sterling treats himself to a spot of breakfast after missing out on being crowned Young Player of the Year. The night before. It
was like the time Ashley Cole, the great Ashley, after
crashed the car.
Well, no, he just came. He was seen smiling. It was during some England escapade. I mean, they were doing very badly in some tournament. Now that could be a choice of many occasions, but I think he was coming off a plane, and he was seen smiling and apparently enjoying a joke of some kind. And
to see that racism still exist in British football is just. It just must be soul destroying for those players. We thought the violence. They talk about taking the violence, the terrorist violence out of British football, making it a more family place. To me, the one was more shocking last week was the guy throwing the banana. Banana skin. I just thought that's the 70s. Like now, reportedly arrested, presumably gets a life ban from Spurs, but like. The good thing is video now captures this stuff and they're nailed. The bad thing is that it still exists. It just
but the real danger though is that this is just going to be seen as a football story, and what's football going to do to stop this, right? Talk to the Tory party about this. This is not about football.
It's a symptom.
Yeah, and that is you'll see all this. Football now will be sort of saying, what are we going to do about this?
Bring back ID cards.
Yeah, this stuff. So that's fundamentally wrong. That this is not about football, really.